My son and daughter-in-law handed my wife, who had just finished 6 weeks of radiation, a list of 33 dishes and expected her to cook everything for their 40 guests in 4 days. Then my daughter-in-law told her to stay hidden in the kitchen because her headscarf would ruin the atmosphere. I didn't argue. I quietly canceled the catering flower's furniture and every card they were using. When the guests arrived and the house began falling apart, my son finally noticed the man sitting in the corner with a laptop full of evidence. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to protect someone you love from family manipulation? Yes or no? I read every comment. Some details here are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real situations is coincidental. What matters most is the lesson. I helped my wife from the hospital wheelchair into our car, her hands too weak to grip the door handle. 6 weeks of radiation had left Edith's body fragile as old paper. My name is Curtis Griffin. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 20 years at the SEC hunting financial predators before founding my own consulting firm. You learn patterns in that work: how to spot fraud before it collapses, how to read faces when numbers don't match stories, how to protect people who can't protect themselves. I never imagined I'd need those skills against my own son. Edith, my 61-year-old wife, had just completed 6 weeks of brutal radiation therapy for breast cancer at Providence Portland Medical Center. The doctor's final instructions were clear: no heavy lifting, no prolonged standing, no carrying items for at least 3 to 4 weeks. Her immune system needed absolute rest. "It's finally over," Edith whispered, resting her head on my shoulder as I drove us home through Portland's afternoon traffic. I squeezed her hand gently. Yes, it's over. I'd prepared everything. The downstairs bedroom had been converted into a recovery space armchair by the window, white vase with fresh flowers on the nightstand, all her medications organized by day and time. No stairs to climb, no strain, just rest and healing. We pulled into the driveway at 3:45 on Tuesday, June 3rd. I helped Edith from the car, one slow step at a time, her weight barely registering against my arm. She'd lost 15 pounds during treatment. The cream silk scarf covering her head, a gift from her mother decades ago, was the only color against her pale face. Inside, I guided her to the armchair. She sank into it with a sigh that seemed to release 6 weeks of tension. "Would you like tea?" I asked. "Just water, and maybe to close my eyes for a moment." I was filling her glass in the kitchen when I heard it. Sound of a key in the front door. Nobody knocked. Leopold, our 34-year-old son, walked in like he owned the place, his wife Astrid beside him. Astrid Barton Griffin, 31 years old, had never been told no in her privileged life. She wore a cream blouse and pearl necklace that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Mom." Leopold crossed the living room in 3 strides. "You're back? How are you feeling?" Edith opened her eyes, managing a tired smile. "Tired, sweetheart. But glad to be home. That's great." Leopold glanced at Astrid, who nodded. "Listen, we need to talk about something. It's kind of urgent." I stepped out of the kitchen, water glass in hand. Leopold didn't look at me. "We're hosting a party this Saturday," he announced. 40 people from Astrid's family. Our house is spacious enough. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Our house. Not his house, ours. The house Edith and I had paid off over 30 years. Edith blinked slowly. "Saturday. That's only 4 days. I know it's short notice." Astrid said, her voice bright and dismissive. She pulled a stapled stack of papers from her designer bag and placed them on the coffee table in front of Edith. "But I've organized everything by category. 6 sections. Each guest has specific allergen restrictions listed here." I watched as Edith reached for the papers with trembling hands. The same hands that couldn't grip a car door handle 90 minutes ago. She stared at the first page, then the second, then flipped through the rest, her face growing paler with each turn. 33 dishes! Her voice was barely audible. Astrid smiled. It sounds like a lot, but they're mostly simple. Appetizers, main sides, desserts, beverages, and dietary alternatives. Everything's labeled. I even included which utensils to use for each allergen category, so there's no cross-contamination. I stepped closer, standing behind Edith's chair. I could see the tremor in her shoulders. The same woman who'd survived 6 weeks of radiation was now calculating whether she could manage 33 dishes in 4 days. Leopold, I said quietly. Your mother just got home from the hospital. The doctor said... I know what the doctor said. Leopold's voice had an edge I recognized from his teenage years, when he'd learned that defensiveness could substitute for accountability. That's why we're giving her 4 whole days, and it's not like she has to do it alone. Mom loves cooking. She always says it relaxes her. Edith said nothing, just held the papers and stared at the list. Astrid leaned forward, her expression earnest. Mrs. Griffin, I really appreciate this. My father's business partners will be there, and first impressions matter so much for Leopold's investment opportunity. He needs this. He needs this. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd bailed out of a drunk driving arrest at 17, the young man who'd declared bankruptcy at 24 and asked his mother to sell her grandmother's bracelet to cover his debts. Edith's hands trembled as she turned another page. Salmon en croûte, truffle risotto, beef Wellington, gluten-free pasta primavera, vegan shepherd's pie, dairy-free creme brulee. Astrid, Edith whispered. I'm not sure I can. You'll do amazing, Astrid cut in. You always do. I stood behind my wife, counting the dishes, and my eyes drifted to the shelf behind the kitchen. Grandmother's small tin box sat there, the one Leopold had once suggested we sell off when he needed cash for his first startup. The tin box that held Edith's mother's handwritten recipes, each one a memory she'd carried through 40 years of marriage. Edith held the stapled papers with trembling hands. Hands that could barely grip a car door handle 3 hours ago. Astrid reached into her bag again. Oh, one more thing. Astrid pulled out the second sheet, a single page typed in the same clinical font as the menu. One more thing, she said, her voice light and casual. It would be better if you stayed in the kitchen during the party, Helen. The headscarf, you understand. It doesn't really fit the vibe we're creating. Helen. She'd gotten my wife's name wrong. After 7 years of marriage to my son, Astrid still couldn't remember that her mother-in-law's name was Edith. Edith's hand went to the cream silk scarf covering her head, the one her own mother had given her 40 years ago. Her fingers trembled as they touched the fabric. Leopold stood beside his wife, silent, offering no objection, no defense of his mother. I stepped between them and Edith's chair. No, I said. Astrid blinked as if I'd spoken a foreign language. I'm sorry. No party, no menu, no hiding my wife in her own kitchen. See, Leopold already promised us the house would be entirely ours to use. Astrid turned to my son. Didn't you, Leopold? Leopold's jaw tightened. Dad, this is important. Astrid's father is bringing his business partners. If this goes well, I could get a $3 million investment for the firm. $3 million. The same son who'd declared bankruptcy at 24 was now chasing venture capital. I walked to the fireplace. The gas starter clicked on with a soft hiss. I picked up the stapled menu from the coffee table, 33 dishes, 6 categories, allergen lists and all, and held it over the flames. Dad, what are you? I dropped the papers into the fire. They curled and blackened, the typed instructions melting into ash. Not tearing them in anger, burning them with cold, deliberate erasure. Ah, you're insane, Astrid whispered. Leopold grabbed her arm. Let's go. We'll figure this out somewhere else. They left without saying goodbye to Edith. The front door slammed. 30 seconds later, Leopold's bedroom door upstairs slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. I turned off the fireplace. The ash from the burned menu settled on the cold hearth, like the residue of every unspoken boundary I'd failed to enforce over 34 years. Edith sat in her armchair, staring at the empty coffee table where the papers had been. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did. He'll be furious. Good. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Curtis, he's trying to build something. Maybe this investment could finally succeed, finally pay us back, finally prove he's not the man who's borrowed and burned through every second chance we've given him. Edith said nothing, just pressed her hand to her forehead, the way she did when the fatigue became too much. I knelt in front of her chair. Rest. I'll bring you dinner in an hour. She nodded, eyes already closing. 4.5 hours passed. I made soup, chicken, and rice easy on her stomach. Brought it to her on a tray with toast and tea. She ate half, then fell asleep in the armchair with the empty bowl still in her lap. I carried her to the downstairs bedroom, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and watched her chest rise and fall with the slow rhythm of medicated sleep. Then I returned to the living room. 9 o'clock. The house bathed in warm yellow light from the table lamps. I sat on the sofa across from Edith's empty armchair and thought about the last 34 years. How many times had I told myself that being a good father meant giving endlessly, absorbing, silently forgiving automatically? How many times had I watched Edith sacrifice paying Leopold's college tuition when he partied through freshman year, staying up sleepless nights when he was sick, selling her mother's silver bracelet to pay off his first startup debt? And what had we taught him by never saying no? Footsteps on the stairs. Edith appeared in the doorway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. You should be resting, I said. She lowered herself into the armchair, moving carefully like someone handling fragile glass. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about Leopold. So do I. What are we going to do? I stood and crossed to her chair. Knelt in front of her the way I had that afternoon, but this time I took both her hands in mine. Do you remember how much you gave up for him? I asked. The tuition when he failed out sophomore year, the nights you sat in hospital waiting rooms when he crashed his car drunk at 19, the bracelet your mother gave you, the one you sold so he could pay creditors after his first business collapsed. Edith's voice broke. He was struggling. He needed help, and you gave it. Every time. Without question, without conditions. I squeezed her hands gently. This time you don't save him. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But he's still our son. Which is exactly why he needs to learn that bloodline isn't a license to mistreat people, especially not the woman who gave up everything to protect him. What are you going to do? I stood looking toward my study, the room where I'd spent 20 years reviewing financial statements, tracking fraudulent transactions, dismantling schemes built on lies and stolen trust. One word: audit. Edith stared at me. Audit what? Everything. I crossed the living room and opened the door to my study. The room lined with leather-bound books and mahogany shelves, the sanctuary where I'd spent 2 decades hunting corporate predators before they could destroy lives. I closed the door behind me. The lock clicked into place with quiet finality. Turned on the monitor. Blue screen glow illuminated my face in the darkness. I typed my password into the banking portal with the muscle memory of 20 years investigating fraud. The laptop screen glowed blue in the darkness of my study at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Personal savings account. Established 7 years ago under my sole name with Leopold, added as authorized user conditional withdrawal rights only. Approved business expenses documented in writing, reviewed quarterly. I downloaded 12 months of statements, The spreadsheet populated line by line. Date, description, amount. June monthly golf club dues, $1,800. May VIP football season tickets, $3,200. April yacht club deposit, $4,500. March, February. January restaurants. I'd never been to hotels, I'd never stayed in watches I'd never worn. I pulled a pencil from the desk drawer and began marking each line. An old SEC habit. Hand marking evidence creates muscle memory, forces you to see every detail twice. 8 months of withdrawals. Total $89,000. Not a single transaction fit approved business purposes. Not one. Conditional withdrawal rights. The phrase echoed in my head like testimony under oath. I'd created that account during Leopold's second bankruptcy, when he'd sworn he'd only use it for legitimate consulting work, while his credit recovered. I'd believed him. I scrolled down. Food delivery confirmation, $6,200. Authorized billing name, Curtis Griffin. He'd ordered the entire party on my account. The 33-dish menu Astrid had presented to Edith, the catering bill, had been charged to me 3 days ago. I sat back in my chair, the pencil still in my hand. No anger. That would come later, maybe. Right now, only the cold focus I'd learned in 2 decades of corporate fraud investigations. Trace the pattern. Document the evidence. Build the case. I saved the statements to a secure folder, then reached for my phone. 11 o'clock. Late, but this couldn't wait. I dialed Alaric Upshaw. 2 rings. Curtis. His voice alert, despite the hour. Alaric, 38, now managed the consulting firm I'd built and sold 3 years ago, and he'd just proven why I'd trusted him to run it. Sorry to call so late, I said. No problem. I've been waiting for you to reach out, actually. That stopped me. Why? 3 weeks ago, your son came to the office, introduced himself as your authorized representative, said you'd agreed to host a major client event at your home, wanted to rent equipment under Griffin Consulting's name. Tables, chairs, tents, heaters, dinnerware. The whole setup. I closed my eyes and said I kept the original contract. Couldn't execute it without verifying with you first. No power of attorney on file. No signature from you authorizing him to act on the firm's behalf. I've been holding the paperwork waiting for your call. 20 years I'd spent building that firm. 3 years since I'd sold it to Alaric and his partners, and my son had walked in pretending to represent me. Cancel the entire Saturday order, I said. Effective immediately. Tables, chairs, tents, everything. Already done. Well, most of it. I heard papers rustling. When you didn't confirm within 48 hours, I started canceling ancillary orders Leopold had placed through third-party vendors, flowers, wine service, valet, parking, catering staff. All canceled yesterday. Thank you. The tent and furniture rental is the last piece. I'll call first thing tomorrow morning and cancel that too. I thanked Alaric and started to hang up, but he spoke again. One more thing. Last month, someone from Barton Construction came to the office, asked questions about your assets, property holdings, investment portfolios, liquidity, claimed to be conducting due diligence for an investment deal Leopold was pursuing. Left a business card. Barton Construction. Vincent Barton. Astrid's father. The party wasn't about family. It was a business trap. Do you still have the card? I asked. On my desk. Keep it. I may need it. I thanked Alaric again and set down the phone. The weight of Leopold's forgery settled over the weight of his theft. 2 crimes, not one. In 20 years at the SEC, I'd seen this pattern 100 times. Small frauds escalate. A man who'll steal from a parent will forge a parent's signature. A man who'll forge once will forge again. The progression was as predictable as compound interest. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Evidence log. Case number none. This was personal, not federal. Item 1. Bank statements showing $89,000 unauthorized withdrawal over 8 months. Item 2. Food delivery receipt $6,200 charged without consent. Item 3. Fraudulent representation to Griffin Consulting, attempting to bind firm to rental contract using my name without authorization. Item 4. Third-party due diligence inquiry from Barton Construction suggesting coordinated deception between Leopold and Astrid's family. I saved the file under a password only I knew. Then I stood and walked to the window. Across the narrow hallway, light still glowed beneath Leopold's bedroom door. The faint sound of movement pacing maybe drifted through the silence. He couldn't sleep either. I wondered if he knew, if some part of him understood, that the walls were closing in, that the same man who'd taught him to ride a bike had just begun building a case against him with the precision of 2 decades hunting predators. The pacing stopped. His light stayed on. I turned away from the window and sat back down at my desk. Opened my email. Began drafting messages I'd send in the morning to my attorney, to my accountant, to 3 other people whose testimony I'd need. By midnight, the framework was complete. Not revenge. Not punishment. Accountability. I finally slept around 2 in the morning, knowing Leopold's light had stayed on until at least 1:30. When the knock came Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, 3 sharp raps, I was already awake, coffee in hand. Constance Manning stood on the porch holding a coffee mug and a 2-page written statement. Constance, our 70-year-old neighbor and retired ICU nurse, had lived next door for 15 years. She'd watched everything through her kitchen window and documented it with 30 years of medical precision. I don't know if you need this, she said, handing me the papers. But a nurse knows when to take notes. Exact dates times 30 years of ICU training. I scanned the first page. Last Tuesday afternoon, 3:45 p.m., observed patient returning home from vehicle displaying visible weakness, assisted ambulation tremor in upper extremities, consistent with post-radiation fatigue. The second page detailed something else entirely. Astrid came to my house last week, Constance said quietly. Asked me to convince Edith that light cooking would help her recovery. Said movement keeps patients from getting depressed. I looked up from the paper. What did you say? I told her I'd be recording our conversation for medical documentation purposes. Announced it clearly before she said another word. Constance pulled out her phone. She knew I was recording, and she kept talking anyway, very confident. Fully admissible. Can I keep this? I asked, holding up the statement. That's why I brought it. Can you come by on Saturday around 4 o'clock, Sunkitusi? Constance studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. I'll be here. I squeezed the elderly woman's hand before she turned to leave the first ally in a war I hadn't asked for, but would finish. At 10 o'clock, I sat across from Francis Ward in his office at Ward & Associates law firm downtown Portland. Francis, 66, had sat beside me in countless depositions over 20 years of federal cases. A familiar room, a familiar face, an unfamiliar target. I laid the evidence on his desk. 12 months of bank statements. Alaric's scanned contract showing Leopold's forged representation. Constance's written statement. The recording. Francis reviewed each document in silence, his reading glasses perched on his nose. When he finished, he set down the last page and looked at me. You want to sue? Not yet. Report to police? Not yet. Then what? 4 items, I said. First, transfer all remaining funds from my personal savings to a revocable trust set up solely for Edith. I'm trustee, she's sole beneficiary. Effective today. Francis made a note. Second, cancel Leopold's supplementary credit card immediately. Third, withdraw my co-signature from the SUV lease. Written notice to the leasing company. They have 48 hours to contact Leopold about independent qualification. Francis's pen paused. He won't qualify on his own. They'll repossess. I know. Fourth, I took a breath. Revise my will. Leopold receives exactly $1. Everything else goes to Edith, and after her passing, to the Oregon Elder Financial Abuse Support Fund. Francis set down his pen. $1, not zero. Correct. Smart. He nodded slowly. Leaving $1 proves you didn't forget him, you intentionally excluded him. Much harder to contest in court. You still remember your SEC days. When does a safety net become a hammock for greed? And when does a father's generosity become an accomplice to cruelty? I'd spent 20 years asking those questions about corporate executives. Never thought I'd ask them about my own son. Francis pulled out a legal pad. I can have all 4 executed by end of business today. But Curtis, he leaned forward. Once this starts, there's no walking it back quietly. Leopold will know. Astrid will know. This becomes permanent. It already is permanent, I said. I'm just making it official. Francis began drafting. I watched him work the same methodical precision I'd seen in 100 case preparations. By noon, he'd prepared the trust documents, credit card cancellation, notice, lease, withdrawal letter, and revised will. Then he pulled out one more form. Oregon DOJ White-Collar Crime Unit, he said, sliding it across the desk. Complaint form for commercial forgery. Oregon Revised Statute 165.013 Class C felony. Your son forged your authorization to bind Griffin Consulting to a commercial contract. When you submit this, and you're a 20-year SEC veteran, so it carries significant weight with state investigators, they'll open a file. I'm not filing it yet. Francis raised an eyebrow. Then why draft it? Leverage. He needs to see what happens if he doesn't make this right. Francis studied me. Then he signed the bottom of the complaint form as witness and slid it into a manila envelope. I'll hold it here. You tell me when. By 2 o'clock, all 4 tasks were confirmed, executed. The trust was established. Leopold's credit card revoked. The leasing company notified. The will revised and notarized. Francis walked me to the door. Your son is going to be very angry. I expect so. And your wife. She'll understand, eventually. I was back in my study by 2:30 reviewing Francis's confirmation emails on my laptop. Trust established, card revoked, co-signer withdrawn, will revised. My phone vibrated on the desk. Text from Leopold. Catering delivery time isn't confirmed yet. Has Mom started prepping? I didn't respond to Leopold's text Wednesday night. Let him wonder. Let him sit with the uncertainty while I slept, for the first time in 3 days, knowing every piece was already in motion. Thursday morning at 7 o'clock, Leopold came down to the kitchen, his face already tight with the anxiety of a man running out of time and options. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled dress shirt from yesterday, hair uncombed. He looked like someone who'd spent the night pacing. Edith sat at the small table by the window, sipping tea morning light, filtering through the curtains. Her movements slow and careful. She looked up when our son entered, but said nothing. Just watched. Has she started prepping? Leopold asked, directing the question at me, not his mother, as if she weren't sitting 3 feet away. No, I said. Leopold's jaw tightened. The food order I texted you yesterday about delivery confirmation. Canceled, as I notified the vendor. What are you talking about? I never got... He pulled out his phone fingers, moving quickly across the screen. Tapped. Swiped. Then he stopped. Stared. Tapped again, harder this time. His face went pale. A credit card declined, he muttered. He switched to another app, the banking one I recognized from my own phone. His thumb moved frantically. Debit balance! 0! He looked up at me, confusion shifting to recognition. shifting to rage in the span of 3 seconds. You did this. I took back my money, I said calmly. Took a sip of my coffee. Let the silence stretch. My name is on that account. Your name was listed as an authorized user under specific conditions. Approved business expenses only, in writing, reviewed quarterly. I set down my mug. You violated those conditions for 8 consecutive months. I simply revoked access. Leopold's hand trembled around his phone. You can't just, this is illegal. You can't freeze someone's account without, it's not your account. It never was. You had conditional access to my account. I can revoke conditional access at any time. Dad, this is insane. I need that money. You needed my permission before spending it. You chose not to ask. You chose to help yourself to golf memberships and yacht club deposits instead. Leopold started to respond when footsteps thundered down the stairs. Heavy, frantic. Astrid appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone pressed to her ear, face drained of color. She ended the call with a shaking hand. Leopold, the car leasing company, just called. They said something about repossession. Leopold spun toward her. What? They said your co-signer withdrew authorization. You have to prove independent financial qualification within 48 hours, or they're taking the car. Her voice rose with each word. What is happening? Leopold turned slowly back to me. The SUV, too. I removed my name as co-signer, I said. That lease was contingent on my credit. You don't qualify on your own. The leasing company has 48 hours to verify your independent income. When they can't, they'll repossess. You're trying to destroy me. No, I'm trying to stop enabling you. There's a difference. Edith set down her teacup, the porcelain clicking against the saucer. She looked between us, but said nothing. Her silence louder than any protest. Leopold grabbed his keys from the counter. We need to talk. Now. Living room. We moved from the kitchen through the narrow hallway. Leopold paced in front of the fireplace, while Astrid stood rigid near the window, arms crossed, watching her husband unravel. You don't understand how critical this party is, Leopold said, his voice rising. This isn't just some social event. This is my entire future. Everything I've been building. I sat on the sofa, hands folded in my lap. How much? The investment you're chasing. How much? Silence. Leopold looked at Astrid. She looked at the floor. How much, Leopold? Astrid spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. $3 million. I laughed, a genuine hollow sound that surprised even me, because the absurdity had finally breached the dam I'd built around my anger. The sheer scale of it. The audacity. I laughed at a man who'd steal from his parents to impress his in-laws, who'd use a woman recovering from cancer as an unpaid chef to secure an investment he'd never earn on merit. You think this is funny? Leopold demanded. You want to use your mother, who finished 6 weeks of radiation therapy 4 days ago, who spent Tuesday night asleep before she'd even finished her soup, to cook 33 dishes in 4 days, so you can impress a man into investing $3 million in a company that's already failed twice before. It hasn't failed, I restructured. You declared bankruptcy. Twice. The first time you borrowed from my retirement account and never paid it back. Both times your mother paid a price you never acknowledged. Now you're restructuring again by stealing from me and exploiting your mother. Leopold's face flushed red. You always frame things in the worst possible way. You always make me sound like some kind of criminal. No, I said quietly. I frame them as they are. You framed them yourself the moment you looked at your mother and decided her headscarf wasn't pretty enough for your dinner table. Astrid flinched. Leopold opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Oh, this is different. Vincent Barton is serious about this investment. He's already conducted due diligence. On me, I interrupted. Not on you. He sent someone to my consulting firm last month asking about my assets, my property holdings, my liquidity. This party was never about your business. It was about showing your father-in-law that you come from money, that I'd back you. Leopold stared at me. So what if it was? That's how deals work. Relationships. Trust. He needs to see I have a stable foundation. You don't have a stable foundation. You have a father you've been robbing for 8 months and a mother you tried to hide in the kitchen. I wasn't hiding her. Astrid told her the headscarf didn't fit the vibe. Leopold looked at his wife. Astrid looked away. Dad. Leopold's voice dropped, almost pleading. If you don't help me, if you don't lend me the card just for this weekend, you're ruining my future with your own hands. I stood, looked at my son, 34 years old, standing on the edge of a collapse entirely of his own making. 2 words, absolute clarity. I know. I left the room, walked upstairs. Let Leopold absorb the weight of those 2 words. By 9 o'clock, Thursday morning, Leopold had called 16 restaurants, and every single one had given him the same answer: impossible. 2 days' notice, 40 people, absolutely impossible. I heard him from my study, the desperation rising in his voice with each call. The kitchen table covered with his phone and scribbled notes, names, numbers, prices crossed out again and again. 40 people, Saturday afternoon, I can pay up front. The voice on speakerphone cut him off. Sir, we need at least 2 weeks' notice for parties that size. I'm sorry. Click. Leopold slammed his hand on the table. Astrid stood beside him, arms crossed, watching her husband spiral. I came down the stairs, poured myself a fresh coffee, and stood in the kitchen doorway. Leopold dialed again. This time a buffet catering company. Saturday. The woman on the phone sounded skeptical. That's tight. Really tight. But we could do a basic buffet setup. 40 guests, $12,000. Full payment up front. Non-refundable. Leopold's eyes lit up. Yes. Done. I'll give you my card right now. He pulled out his wallet, read the first card number into the phone. Waited. I'm sorry, sir. That card was declined. Leopold's face went white. He grabbed a second card. Try this one. Another pause. Also declined, sir. That's impossible. Try it again. I've tried both cards twice. Neither is going through. Do you have another form of payment? Leopold hung up without answering. He turned to me, his voice breaking. Lend me your card. Just this once. I'll pay you back. I swear I'll pay you back. Like the money you took from my savings account over the past 8 months. The room fell silent. Astrid looked between us. Leopold's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I thought you were bluffing, he whispered. That's your flaw, I said. You assume people will endure indefinitely. I walked to my study, pulled open the desk drawer where I'd filed the evidence Francis and I had compiled. 12 months of bank statements, each unauthorized withdrawal circled in red ink. I returned to the kitchen and placed them on the table in front of Leopold. Read, I said. Leopold stared at the papers like they might bite him. Astrid's hand shot across the table, snatching the papers before Leopold could stop her. She flipped through the first page, then the second. Her eyes scanning each red circle. Golf club membership, she read aloud. $1,800, monthly. Flip. Yacht club deposit. $4,500. Flip. VIP football season tickets. $3,200. She kept reading. Luxury restaurants. 5-star hotels in cities Leopold claimed were business trips. Designer watches. Premium liquor subscriptions. Her voice rose with each item. Leopold, you told me the company paid for all of this. If your father invested like he promised, the company would be profitable, Leopold shouted back. These would all be legitimate business expenses. If Astrid threw the papers at him. You've been lying to me for months. I've been trying to build something. You wanted the golf club membership. You said it was important for networking. You wanted access to the yacht club for your friends. I wanted those things because you told me we could afford them. You said the company was growing. It would be growing if your father actually followed through. Astrid's face flushed red. What about right now? Forget my father. What's the company's status right now? Silence. Leopold looked away. Leopold. Astrid's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. What's the current revenue status? We're restructuring. That's not an answer. We've had 8 consecutive months of negative revenue, but once we secure proper funding, 8 months. Astrid stepped back. You've been operating at a loss for 8 months, and you didn't tell me. I was handling it by stealing from your father. You kept demanding things. Leopold's voice cracked. The golf club, the yacht, the car, the apartment in the Pearl District. Where was I supposed to get the money? Don't you dare blame me for your lies. How many times had I watched this exact dynamic? 2 people who'd built a life on mutual delusion, each waiting for the other to fix what they'd both broken. I stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand, watching them tear each other apart. I could have intervened, could have separated them, calmed them down, played mediator like I had 100 times before. I didn't move. Let them see each other clearly for the first time. Let them understand what they'd built together, a house of cards on a foundation of debt and lies. Astrid grabbed her purse. I'm calling my father. No. Leopold lunged for her phone. Don't. Please. If he finds out what, that you're a fraud, that you've been using his daughter to get close to his money, that you planned this entire party as some kind of elaborate con. It's not a con, it's strategy, it's how business works. It's theft, Leopold. You stole from your parents to fund a fantasy. Leopold's chest heaved. He looked at me standing silent in the doorway, then looked at the bank statements scattered across the table, then at Astrid, who was already texting someone, probably her father. He stopped mid-breath, his eyes darting toward the hallway where my study door stood closed. Something flickered across his face, desperate and dangerous. He looked back at me. There's one more thing you don't know, he said, voice low and tight. I raised an eyebrow, waited. Leopold's confession came out in a rush, words tumbling over each other like a man trying to outrun the truth he'd been carrying for 3 weeks. I went to your old office, Griffin Consulting, told them I was your authorized representative. He spoke fast, not meeting my eyes. Just to get credit terms for the party equipment, tables, chairs, tents, heaters, all of it. I was going to pay everything back after the investment came through. I swear I was going to pay it back. When? I asked calmly. 3 weeks ago, May 15th. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to my email, found the message from Alaric sent Tuesday night at 11:43 p.m., turned the screen toward Leopold. What Alaric sent me this Tuesday. The scanned contract with your forged signature representing yourself as my authorized agent. Leopold stared at the screen. His face went from pale to gray. You've known since Tuesday. I've known since Tuesday. And you didn't say anything. I was waiting to see if you'd confess on your own. I pocketed my phone. You didn't. You were going to let it play out, hope I never found out, hope the equipment company processed the order and billed Griffin Consulting after the fact. Leopold's hands shook. Are you calling the police? Not yet. Not yet. But you need to understand what forging a signature on a commercial contract is in Oregon. I kept my voice level professional, the same tone I'd used in 100 depositions. Class C felony under Oregon Revised Statute 165.013, commercial forgery, up to 5 years in prison. The color drained completely from Leopold's face. 5 years, he whispered. 5 years. Dad, I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you did. You walked into that office, looked Alaric in the eye, and lied. You signed my name to a contract I never authorized, binding a company I built to an obligation I never approved. That's not an accident. That's premeditated fraud. Leopold sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. We sat in silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. Somewhere upstairs, water ran through pipes as Astrid used the bathroom. Then Leopold's phone buzzed on the coffee table, loud, insistent. We both looked at the screen. Barton Construction. Leopold stared at it like it might explode. Looked at me. I nodded. Answer it. He picked up the phone with a trembling hand. Hello, Leopold. The voice on the other end was male, calm, terrifyingly controlled. Vincent Barton. I could hear him clearly from where I sat. I want a quick chat before the party. Tomorrow evening, say 6 o'clock. Yes, sir, of course. Good. A pause. I should tell you something up front, Leopold. I commissioned a private investigation report 2 months ago when you first mentioned the investment opportunity. 40 years of business taught me one rule: never write a check without reading the books. Leopold's breathing became shallow. Vincent Barton. 63 years old, built a $40 million construction empire on one unbreakable principle: never sign a check without reading every line of the ledger. I know about the 8 months of negative revenue, Vincent continued. The $340,000 in accrued debt, the co-signed SUV, the credit cards maxed out in your father's name. I know all of it. Leopold closed his eyes. I'm still coming tomorrow evening, Vincent said. I want to look you in the eye and hear your explanation face to face. That's the minimum I require before making any final decision. Do you understand? Yes, sir. See you at 6. Click. Leopold set down the phone. His hand shook so badly the device clattered against the table. He looked at me, face ashen. You knew he had this report. I turned the page of the newspaper I'd been holding since the argument started. Hadn't read a word of it. I assumed he'd bring it. Mr. Barton is a serious businessman. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything? Leopold had no answer for that. I watched my son realize the party he'd sacrificed his mother's health for was never an opportunity. It was an execution chamber with 40 witnesses. Vincent Barton hadn't come to invest. He'd come to watch Leopold explain himself in front of Astrid's entire extended family before delivering the final rejection. The cruelty of it was almost elegant. What do I do? Leopold whispered. You could start by telling the truth. The truth. The truth is, I'm 34 years old, and I've failed at everything I've tried. The truth is, I've been lying to my wife for 8 months. The truth is, I stole from my father and forged his signature, and I don't know how to fix any of it. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. That's a start, I said quietly. Footsteps on the stairs broke the silence. Astrid appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, face flushed from another round of failed restaurant calls. She looked between us, oblivious to the wreckage scattered across the room, the bank statements, the confession, the phone call that had just dismantled what remained of Leopold's future. Catering rejected us a 3rd time, she said. Leopold, what are we serving 40 people tomorrow? Neither Leopold nor I answered Astrid's question. I left them to their panic and walked down the hallway toward the downstairs bedroom where the afternoon light fell golden and quiet through the curtains. Edith sat in her armchair by the window, a book open in her lap. She looked up when I entered, and I could see in her eyes that she'd heard the shouting. Do you think we're doing the right thing? She asked softly. I pulled the small chair from beside her bed and sat facing her, took her hand. I investigated a man once, I said. 20 years ago. He'd stolen his sick wife's retirement savings to invest in a startup not out of greed, but desperation. Fear of failure had blurred his moral lines so completely he couldn't see them anymore. When I asked him why he did it, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "I thought she would understand." Edith's fingers tightened around mine. The wife filed for divorce the day he was sentenced. I continued. Not because of the theft, because he'd assumed her love meant permission to destroy her. Is Leopold like that? Edith asked. Does he think I'll understand? Stay halfway, I said. The other half is that he knows exactly what he's doing. He just believes the consequences won't apply to him. Edith looked out the window at the afternoon sun filtering through the oak tree in our yard. So what are we punishing, his fear or his choice? We're punishing choice. Everyone experiences fear. Failure, judgment, inadequacy, those are universal. But choice is something you answer for yourself. Leopold chose to steal, chose to forge, chose to exploit you when you were at your weakest. Fear might explain it, but it doesn't excuse it. Edith held my hand tightly, and for a moment we sat in the golden quiet of that room, two people who'd built a life together, now dismantling the illusions we'd let our son hide behind. Are you sure it will be okay? She whispered. I looked out the window, watching the light shift through the branches. No, I said honestly. But I'm sure you will be. She nodded, closed her eyes. The conversation was over. I kissed her forehead and left her to rest. That evening at 9 o'clock, I sat alone in my study, printed 3 sets of documents. The bank statements with unauthorized withdrawals circled in red ink. The forgery contract Alaric had scanned and emailed. Constance's 2-page written statement documenting dates, times, medical observations. I placed 1 complete set in a large manila envelope, addressed it to Francis Ward at his law office, and left it on the hall table for tomorrow's mail. Backup evidence in case anything happened to the originals. The second set I placed in another envelope and left on my desk. Then I opened the FBI White-Collar Crime Division complaint form Francis had prepared Wednesday afternoon. The form sat there on my screen, half-filled. Complainant name, address, relationship to accused. Description of alleged crime, commercial forgery, unauthorized use of business name, fraudulent representation. I filled in the remaining details. Saved the file. Did not sign it. Did not submit it. Francis held the digital master copy in his encrypted files. A loaded weapon waiting in a vault ready to fire with a single phone call. Not filed, not yet, but ready. My phone buzzed. Text from Constance Manning. I'll arrive at 4 tomorrow. Can I bring pastries? I typed back, bring whatever you like. The evidence sat in neat stacks on my desk. Like the pieces of a dismantled bomb, each one harmless alone, devastating when assembled before an audience. I turned off the study light and walked down the hall, glanced into the downstairs bedroom. Edith slept peacefully, her breathing steady and deep. The medication and exhaustion had finally pulled her under. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall. The ledger was balanced. The audit was complete. Tomorrow would simply be the presentation of findings. I went upstairs to our bedroom, lay down, closed my eyes. For the first time in 4 days, I slept soundly. No anxiety, no second-guessing. No wondering if I was being too harsh or not harsh enough. Just the quiet certainty of a man who'd done his job. Friday morning, 6 o'clock. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Leopold, coming down early, probably hoping to find food, miraculously appeared overnight, or perhaps planning one last desperate attempt at grocery shopping before the party. I stayed in bed listening, footsteps crossing the living room, the kitchen door swinging open, then silence. I rose, pulled on my robe, and walked quietly to the top of the stairs. From there I could see into the kitchen. Leopold stood in front of the open refrigerator, cold white light spilling across the floor. He stared at the empty shelves. No turkey, no beef, no vegetables, no flour, no butter, no cream, no cheese, no bread, nothing. Just milk for Edith's tea, eggs for her breakfast, one can of soup, her medications lined up on the top shelf where she could reach them without strain. Leopold stood there for a full minute, the refrigerator door hanging open, cold air spilling into the warm kitchen. Then he closed it slowly, turned, and saw me standing at the top of the stairs. Leopold stood frozen in front of the open refrigerator for exactly 3 seconds before his panic converted to motion. He slammed the door and ran toward the living room. I stood at the top of the stairs watching. "Where's the food?" Leopold's voice echoed through the house. "Where's everything?" I walked down, slowly entered the living room, and sat in my armchair. Picked up my coffee from the side table. Opened the newspaper to the business section. Leopold appeared in the doorway, his face flushed, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Where's the food? Where's the catering order? The refrigerator is empty." I turned a page. "Orders canceled as notified." "What?" "I notified the vendors Wednesday morning. All cancellations confirmed by close of business." "I thought you were bluffing." I looked up from the newspaper. "That's your flaw, Leopold. You assume people will endure indefinitely." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Astrid appeared, phone in hand, scrolling frantically through her email. The flowers," she said, voice rising. "The wine service, the rental company, the valet parking, everything's canceled." She looked up, face pale. "Guests arrive at 4 o'clock. That's 10 hours. Leopold grabbed his phone, started dialing. I sipped my coffee and returned to the newspaper. For the next 3 hours, I listened to my son make 16 phone calls to 16 different restaurants. Every conversation followed the same pattern. 40 people, nice, today at 4. I can pay up front. Sir, we need a minimum 2 weeks' notice for parties that size. I'll pay double. We're fully booked, sir, I'm sorry. Click. By 9 o'clock, Leopold had moved from restaurants to catering companies. One finally answered differently. We could do a basic buffet, the woman said. $12,000, full payment up front, non-refundable. Yes, here's my card. I heard the pause. Then, sir, that card was declined. Do you have another? Leopold tried the second card. Also declined. He hung up without saying goodbye. 10:30. Leopold ordered 20 large pizzas for delivery at 3 o'clock. Astrid's voice cut sharp across the kitchen. My mother cannot see pizza, Leopold. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you figure out how to fix this. 11 o'clock. Leopold grabbed his keys and sprinted to the supermarket. I stayed in my armchair reading. He returned 30 minutes later with shopping bags, rotisserie chickens still warm from the deli, canned potatoes, bagged salad, frozen apple pies, dinner rolls in plastic packaging. Astrid stood in the kitchen doorway staring at the hall. This doesn't meet any of the allergen requirements, she said. Then we'll label everything. With what labels, in what time? Leopold didn't answer, just started pulling items from bags. Noon, the kitchen chaos began in earnest. I heard the oven door slam, pots clanging, water running. Astrid's voice issuing instructions Leopold couldn't follow. Heat the sauce on low. It's not heating fast enough. Then turn it up slightly, not all the way. The smell of burning tomatoes filled the house 5 minutes later. I turned another page of the newspaper. The sauce is burning. I'm trying to save it. It's black, Leopold. It's actually black. The smoke detector began screaming. I set down my coffee and walked to the hallway. Stood where I could see into the kitchen but remain invisible to the chaos inside. The kitchen looked like a crime scene. Smoke detectors wailing. Sauce burned black on the stove, the pot still smoking. Frozen pies sitting on the counter like ice bricks. Leopold had forgotten to preheat the oven. Canned potatoes dumped into a bowl, swimming in their own salty brine. Leopold stood in the center holding a spatula, turning in slow circles like a man who'd forgotten what he was doing. Astrid coughed, waving smoke away from her face. "The pies are still frozen," she said. "I know. The potatoes are inedible. I know." "Leopold, what are we doing?" He didn't answer. I watched from the hallway as my son stood in a smoke-filled kitchen, holding a bag of rotisserie chickens and canned potatoes, finally understanding that money couldn't buy competence, or redemption, or the years of experience his mother had accumulated cooking meals he'd taken for granted his entire life. The smoke detector finally stopped screaming when Astrid climbed on a chair and ripped out the battery. Silence fell over the kitchen. Leopold set down the spatula, looked at the clock. 1 o'clock. "The 3 hours," he said. Astrid surveyed the wreckage. Burned sauce, frozen desserts, salty potatoes, bagged salad wilting on the counter. Rotisserie chickens cooling in their plastic containers. "We can't serve this," she said quietly. Leopold said nothing. Astrid looked at the clock again, then at the hallway, then at Leopold. "There's one option left," she said. "No." "Leopold." I said no. "We have no choice. She can barely stand," the doctor said. "I know what the doctor said." Astrid's voice rose. "But unless you have another solution in the next 3 hours, we need her." Leopold stared at his wife, then at the burned sauce, then at the frozen pies. He said nothing. Astrid wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, took a breath, walked toward the hallway. I stepped back into the living room out of sight. I heard her footsteps approach the downstairs bedroom, heard her pause outside the door, then softly a knock. The knock echoed in the quiet bedroom. I'd been sitting beside Edith for the past 20 minutes, waiting for this exact moment. She sat in her armchair by the window, wearing a pale blue dress and the cream silk scarf her mother had given her decades ago. The afternoon light fell soft across her face, catching the silver in her hair that had slowly grown back after radiation. We'd heard the chaos building upstairs for the past hour, footsteps running back and forth across the hardwood. Astrid's voice sharp and frantic, "Where are they?" Leopold's murmur in response too quiet to make out words, but heavy with desperation. Cabinet doors slamming. The clatter of dishes being moved, rearranged, moved again. The smell of burned sauce still lingering in the air. Edith and I had exchanged a glance 30 minutes ago when the panic first started escalating. No words needed. This was the moment we'd planned. The knock came again. Harder this time. I stood and opened the door. Astrid stood in the hallway, still wearing her cream blouse and pearl necklace from this morning. Her face flushed pink hair coming loose from its clip mascara smudged at the corners. Behind her, I could hear Leopold's voice upstairs. "Did you find them? Are they coming?" Astrid didn't look at me. She looked past me directly at Edith as if I weren't standing there at all. "Mom," she said, her voice breathless. "Just make the sauce and arrange the platters. Everyone is waiting. We need you right now." Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of the disinvitation, the demand to hide in the kitchen, during the party, the headscarf that didn't fit the aesthetic vibe. Just a demand for labor. I watched Edith's face. This was the test. Edith's hands rested on the armrests of her chair, pale-veined, steady. The cream silk scarf at her throat lay smooth against radiation-scarred skin. I noticed something I hadn't seen in weeks. She wasn't trembling. Before I tell you what my wife said next, "Are you still with me?" Comment A, if you think she'll help them despite everything. Or B, if you think she'll refuse for the first time in her life. Add one short reason why. Please note the next part includes some recreated details for emotional impact. Edith looked straight at Astrid. For the first time in 7 years of marriage between Leopold and this woman, my wife looked her daughter-in-law directly in the eye, without looking down first. "You told me not to appear," Edith said quietly. Astrid blinked. "Things are different now." "Different how?" "We need you." Edith nodded slowly. That's the difference. When you're afraid I'll ruin your image, you hide me in the bedroom. When you're in trouble, you suddenly remember I'm family. Astrid's face flushed from pink to deep red. You're being selfish. No, Edith said, her voice steady. I'm being honest. I stepped forward, opening the door wider. Get back to your guests, Astrid. Astrid's eyes snapped to me. She glared. You planned this. Both of you. You planned this whole thing. I did, I said. From upstairs, the sounds of chaos filtered down. Ice clinking in glasses, Leopold must have filled himself. His nervous laugh, high and strained, as he tried to explain something to someone who'd arrived early. Cabinet doors opening and closing as he searched desperately for serving platters we didn't own. The house waiting for catastrophe. Astrid stared at us for 3 long seconds. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Then she turned her heels, sharp and angry, on the hardwood floor. I heard her voice as she climbed the stairs. She's refusing to help. Leopold's murmur in response, too quiet to make out. Then clear and unmistakable, the doorbell chimed. I froze. Edith's eyes met mine. The first guest had arrived. Upstairs, Astrid's voice rose to a near shriek. Get the door, Leopold, get the door right now. Footsteps running. Leopold's voice forced cheerfulness already cracking. Coming just a moment. I stayed in the bedroom doorway listening to every sound. The front door opened. A woman's voice, bright and curious. Astrid. So excited to finally see the house. Is your mother here? I brought her flowers, heard she just finished treatment. A pause. Then Astrid's voice, tight and strained. She's resting. Come in, come in. Leopold will take your coat. More footsteps. The woman's voice again. Something smells. Burnt. Is everything okay in the kitchen? Well, everything's fine, Leopold said quickly. Just some last-minute adjustments to the menu. I closed the bedroom door softly and turned to Edith. She sat in her armchair, hands folded in her lap, breathing steady. Are you okay? I asked. She looked up at me. I said no. You did. For the first time in 34 years, I told my son no. I knelt beside her chair, took her hand. How does it feel? She thought about it for a long moment. I said, she said finally. And right. The doorbell rang again. Then again, voices multiplying upstairs. Confusion spreading. Polite questions about the smell, about the missing furniture, about where to put coats when there was no coat rack set up, no entry table. Leopold's voice getting higher with each answer. Astrid's forced laughter, brittle as glass. I stood and walked to the door. Opened it just a crack. Through the narrow gap, I could see up the stairs to the landing. Leopold stood frozen at the top, staring down at the front door. Astrid beside him, hissing something I couldn't hear. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. More insistent. Get the door! Astrid's voice no longer even trying to hide the panic. I closed the bedroom door and returned to Edith. The plan was working. The trap was springing. I pulled open the front door. Vincent Barton stood on the porch in a pressed navy suit, his eyes already cataloging disaster. Vincent stood before me now, doing exactly what I expected of him, reading the chaos written across my house before he'd even stepped inside. His eyes cataloged everything, the missing furniture arrangement, the absence of flowers, the smell of burnt sauce still lingering from the morning's disaster. Beside him stood Helena Barton, his wife. 61 years old, wearing a cream linen dress, holding a wine bottle wrapped in decorative paper. She smiled politely, but her eyes were sharp. "Waxy, we came early to help set up," Vincent said, his voice calm and measured. "Seems we should have come earlier." They stepped inside. The smell hit them immediately. Burnt tomato sauce still lingering from this morning's kitchen disaster. No furniture arranged for seating, no coat rack, no entry table for gifts, no flowers, no music playing. Just empty space and the faint haze of smoke that hadn't quite cleared. Leopold stood frozen at the base of the stairs, his face pale and slick with sweat. Astrid rushed forward, her smile bright and desperate. Things changed slightly. Mom had an emergency. We're improvising a more casual approach. Helena looked around the empty living room. Where would you like me to put this wine? Kitchen, Astrid said quickly. Just the kitchen table is fine. I stepped back, letting them pass. Vincent's eyes met mine for exactly 1 second. He nodded slightly. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement. He knew. As Astrid led Vincent and Helena toward the kitchen, Leopold still stammering excuses behind them, I slipped upstairs. 2 hours earlier, 1:30 p.m., before any of this chaos had fully begun, I'd stood in the master bedroom, preparing for a different kind of departure. I'd pulled 2 vintage leather suitcases from the back of our closet. The same ones Edith and I had used on our honeymoon 40 years ago. Heavy, solid, built to last. I packed light. Resort wear. No sweaters. Hawaii in June didn't need Portland winter clothes. Edith's medication bottles lined up carefully in a zippered pouch. Her medical records in a folder. Her doctor's contact information on a card. Then I reached for the small tin box on the top shelf of the closet. Grandmother's tin box. 50 years of Edith's mother's recipes, handwritten on index cards, yellowed with age and kitchen grease. Each one a memory: Christmas cookies, Sunday pot roast, birthday cakes, measured in love rather than precision. Leopold had suggested selling it 2 years ago when he needed quick cash. Antique tin, he'd said. Could get $50, maybe $75. I'd said no. I tucked the box into the carry-on bag, covered it with a sweater. Edith wouldn't see it until we landed in Honolulu. A gift. A reminder that some things can't be priced or sold or stolen. Edith appeared in the doorway. Really leaving? She asked. 11 o'clock flight tonight, after the party. She looked at me suspiciously. Which dinner? I smiled faintly. The one Leopold prepares himself. Now back in the present chaos at 3:15, I watched from the top of the stairs as the doorbell rang again. And again. Between 3 and 4 o'clock, 40 guests arrived. The living room filled beyond capacity. No chairs arranged, no appetizers, no drinks circulating. Just people standing awkwardly holding coats they had nowhere to hang. Looking around for hosts who were clearly drowning. Children ran between adults' legs, their voices pitching higher as they sensed the tension. Guests murmured to each other, checking phones, exchanging glances. One woman whispered to her husband, "Is this some kind of joke?" Leopold circulated frantically, his dress shirt soaked through with sweat. "Caterer canceled last minute, we're improvising. Very sorry. Can I get you?" He trailed off, realizing he had nothing to offer. Astrid maintained her smile, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Very informal garden party vibe, she told one guest. We wanted something authentic, the burnt, caramelized sugar smell mixed with too much perfume and nervous sweat. Children's voices grew louder, feeding off the adult anxiety they couldn't name but could feel. I stood in the hallway watching. Vincent Barton sat on the sofa, the only furniture in the living room, holding his phone. I could see the screen from where I stood. A document file. The 40-page investigation report he'd mentioned on the phone. He scanned the room methodically, noted the missing setup, the absent food, the panicked hosts, the confused guests. Then he glanced down the hallway. Our eyes met. He gave me a slight nod. Not sympathy, not judgment, just recognition. One businessman acknowledging another's calculated strategy. I nodded back. At 3:45, the doorbell rang again. I opened it. Constance Manning stood on the porch, but she wasn't dressed for a party. She wore simple slacks and a cardigan, her face grave. In her hands, she held a sealed manila envelope. "Stratum," she said quietly. I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket and scanned the crowded living room. Then I froze. Alaric Upshaw sat in the corner armchair, bearded and calm, laptop open on his knees. I'd asked him to arrive at 3:30, blend into the chaos, wait for my signal. He wore casual clothes instead of his usual business attire, his name tag reading Allen, the name of a mutual friend I'd asked him to use if anyone questioned him. Sitting quietly in the corner among 40 confused strangers, he looked like just another guest waiting for food that wasn't coming. Leopold hadn't looked carefully enough at anyone in this room to notice him, except me. I caught his eye, gave a slight nod. He nodded back, fingers resting on his laptop keyboard. On the screen, I could see the scanned documents even from across the room. Forgery contracts, transaction histories, everything Leopold had signed using my name. I crossed the room, slowly weaving through guests. Leopold stood near the kitchen doorway, frantically arranging slices of store-bought pizza on a platter, trying to make gas station food look presentable. His hands shook as he worked, oblivious to everything except his own desperation. I whispered to Alaric as I passed. When I nod, "Ready," he said quietly. I kept moving toward the hallway where Edith stood watching. Leopold picked up the pizza platter and turned toward the living room. Took 3 steps, then stopped mid-stride. His eyes locked on the man sitting in the corner chair. Alaric. Alaric looked up from his laptop and smiled. Natural. Friendly. Like running into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop. "Hello, Leopold. Long time no see." Leopold's face drained of color. The pizza platter tilted in his hands. "What are you doing here?" Alaric gestured to his laptop screen. "Your father invited me. Thought I should bring some documents we've been holding at the office." Leopold's eyes dropped to the screen. I watched from 10 feet away as he recognized his own signature. The forged authorization he'd used to rent equipment under Griffin Consulting's name. The contract Alaric had refused to execute without my approval. The platter slipped from Leopold's hands. Hit the floor. Pizza slices scattered across the hardwood. No one moved to help him pick them up. I stepped into the hallway where Edith stood gazing into the packed living room. 40 people crammed into a space meant for 20. The faint smell of burned sauce still lingering. Children running between adults. Noise and chaos and confusion. "You prepared everything from the start," she said quietly. "Since Tuesday night." She looked at me. "Are you sure this is the only way? Was there another way, one that didn't require public humiliation, didn't force a father to destroy his son in front of strangers?" I'd asked myself that question 100 times over the past 4 days. My father used to say an honest transaction needs no performance. Only false balances require a stage. Edith's hand found mine. "Are you sad?" "Yes," I said. "Sad that this needs to be done." She squeezed my hand. "Then do it." Edith stepped into the living room. She wore her pale blue dress and the cream silk scarf her mother had given her. The scarf she'd been told didn't fit the vibe. The scarf that marked her as a cancer survivor, as someone fragile, as someone to be hidden. Guests noticed immediately. Eyes tracked her movement across the room. The scarf drew attention, soft cream against pale blue, covering what radiation had stolen and what was slowly growing back. Helena Barton approached, her face concerned. "Edith, are you ill?" Edith smiled gently, not forced, not performative, just honest. I finished 6 weeks of breast cancer radiation 4 days ago," she said clearly. "Came home Tuesday." Helena's expression shifted. Shock, then comprehension, then something darker as she glanced toward her daughter. "Oh, my goodness," Helena whispered. "I had no idea." The room quieted. Conversations faltering as people overhead turned to listen. I stepped forward from the hallway. "Of course you had no idea," I said, my voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Your daughter didn't want you to know." Astrid's head snapped toward me. "That's not..." I raised my hand. "Let me speak." The room's chaotic noise, children shrieking, adults murmuring, the rustle of coats and shuffling feet dropped to perfect silence. 40 guests stared at me. Leopold stood frozen near the kitchen doorway, pizza scattered at his feet, face white as paper. Astrid's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Helena Barton's hand went to her throat. Vincent sat on the sofa, phone still in his hand, watching with the calm attention of a man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Alaric closed his laptop quietly, the evidence ready but not yet displayed. Constance Manning stood near the front door, her written statement folded in her purse. The Oregon State Bar envelope rested in my jacket pocket, and Edith stood beside me. Not behind me, not hidden. Beside me. I looked at my son, at the guests who'd come expecting a party and found a disaster, at Vincent Barton, who'd investigated Leopold 2 months ago and knew every detail of what I was about to say. I took a breath. "Dinner won't be served as planned," I said. "But there are things I need to share." I let the silence settle over the room. 40 pairs of eyes fixed on me. Children stopped running. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Then I spoke. 6 days ago, my son Leopold asked me to co-sign a $3 million loan. The words cut through the room like a blade through silk. He needed the investment from Vincent Barton to keep his company afloat. But Mr. Barton required a co-signer with established credit and proven assets. Leopold asked me to guarantee the loan. I paused, let that sink in. Looked at my son, standing frozen near the kitchen doorway, pizza still scattered at his feet. I asked to see his company books first. Standard practice for any financial commitment of that size. He refused. Leopold's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. Then he asked a different favor. I continued, my voice steady. "Convince my wife to cook a 33-dish menu for this party, for the 40 guests standing in this room right now." I reached into my jacket pocket. Not for the Oregon State Bar envelope resting against my chest. For the folded menu I'd been carrying since Tuesday night. I walked slowly across the room to where Vincent Barton sat on the sofa. Every footstep deliberate. Every guest's eye tracking my movement. I handed him the printed pages. Vincent unfolded them. Read the first page, the second, the third. His face darkened with each line, each dish, each impossible demand. 33 dishes. He looked up at me, then across the room at Leopold. "You asked a woman who just finished radiation therapy to cook all this in 4 days." Astrid's voice cut through sharp and defensive. "Edith always loves cooking. It's what she does. It's how she shows love." I turned to face her. My voice stayed calm, level. The same tone I'd used in 100 federal depositions over 20 years. The room shifted. Guests who'd been standing near Astrid took half steps back, creating visible distance. Edith moved forward. Not beside me, in front of me. Taking her own space in front of 40 witnesses, she wore the pale blue dress and cream silk scarf. The scarf Astrid had told her didn't fit the aesthetic vibe. The scarf that marked her as a cancer survivor, as someone wounded, as someone to be ashamed of. Edith looked directly at Astrid. Her voice steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the crowded room. "I love cooking for people who care about me," she said. "Not serving those who hide me from the dinner table." Helena Barton gasped softly. Her hand went to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Astrid told us you were traveling," Helena whispered. "She said you were visiting your sister in California." My voice never wavered, steady, as when I'd testified before congressional committees investigating corporate fraud. But I felt my hands grip the envelope in my pocket until the edges cut into my palms. Leopold stared at the floor, his face the color of old paper, sweat soaking through his shirt collar. Vincent Barton stood, set down the menu on the coffee table, pulled out his phone. 2 months ago. Vincent said, his voice filling the room with the authority of 4 decades building a construction empire. When Leopold first approached me about this investment opportunity, I hired a private investigation firm to conduct thorough due diligence. He turned the phone screen toward the room. I could see the document file even from where I stood. 40 pages, professional letterhead, detailed financial analysis. I have one rule I've kept for 40 years. Vincent said, his voice carrying across the room. Verify before you commit. I applied it here. Leopold's whisper was barely audible. You investigated me. Of course I investigated you. Vincent's tone suggested the question was absurd. You asked me to invest $3 million in a company I'd never personally audited. What did you expect? He scrolled through the document on his phone, read aloud, each word landing like a hammer blow. Then 8 consecutive months of negative revenue. $340,000 in accrued debt. $340,000. The number landed like a body hitting pavement from a great height. I watched guests freeze, saw them calculate their own mortgages, their own savings, their own children's college funds, saw them measure that number against their own lives and find it incomprehensible. Maxed credit cards in both your name and your wife's name. Vincent continued, his voice methodical. Co-signed SUV lease contingent entirely on your father's credit score. 0 liquid assets. No viable path to profitability under current business model. He lowered the phone, looked at Leopold with the expression of a man who'd seen this pattern 100 times before. I came here today to hear you explain this face to face, to give you one chance to tell me why I should invest in a company that's been hemorrhaging money for 8 months straight. Silence. I've heard enough. Vincent sat down. Leopold turned to me, his voice breaking into pieces. You knew he had this report. I assumed, I said simply. Mr. Barton is a serious businessman. You could have warned me. And about what? That someone might investigate your company before investing millions of dollars. That lying to potential investors carries consequences. Leopold had no answer for that. Vincent closed his phone with a soft, final click. The room fell into absolute silence. 40 witnesses to financial fraud and family betrayal. 40 people who'd come expecting a garden party and found themselves watching a public execution. Astrid stood near the fireplace, her face pale, her perfect composure finally cracking like thin ice. She turned slowly to face her husband. Her voice shook. You told me the company was profitable. Leopold didn't answer. Couldn't. She crosses the room with the kind of deliberate calm I recognize from 30 years of watching medical professionals deliver news families don't want to hear. Her phone glows in her hand. Mrs. Barton, Constance says, addressing Helena directly. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Constance Manning. I've lived next door to Curtis and Edith for 15 years. I'm also an ICU nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center, where I worked the same floor as Edith for 3 decades before her retirement. Helena nods, but her expression shows confusion about why a neighbor is addressing her at her daughter's engagement party. Constance turns to face the room, and I notice several guests leaning forward. 3 weeks ago, Astrid knocked on my door. She asked if I could help convince Curtis to co-sign a loan for Leopold's business. She said Curtis was being stubborn and that Edith wanted to help, but Curtis was blocking it. Astrid's face drains of color. I told Astrid I don't interfere in neighbors' financial decisions. Constance continues. But she was persistent. She visited twice more. During her 3rd visit, she offered me $5,000 if I could persuade Curtis to sign. Gasps ripple through the room. Vincent Barton's jaw tightens. I need to clarify something important. Constance says, her voice steady. Oregon is a one-party consent state. That means I'm legally permitted to record a conversation if I'm a participant. So on November 14th, when Astrid made her third visit, I recorded our conversation. Constance taps her phone. A woman's voice fills the room, unmistakably Astrid's. 5,000 Constance. Cash. Just talk to Curtis. Tell him Leopold's company is solid. Tell him Edith mentioned she wanted to help. He listens to you. Constance's recorded voice responds, Astrid. I already explained to Hakunter. 7,000. Astrid's voice interrupts. That's my final offer. One conversation. You don't even have to convince him. Just plant the seed. Constance stops the recording. The silence in the room is absolute. I can hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Helena Barton stands abruptly, her face twisted with disgust. Astrid Eleanor Barton, she says, her voice shaking. You tried to bribe a nurse. You tried to manipulate an elderly couple. Mom, I can explain, Astrid begins. Don't. Helena's word cuts like a blade. Don't say another word to me right now. I feel Edith's hand squeeze mine. When I glance at her, she's not smiling, but there's something fierce and proud in her eyes that I haven't seen in months. Then I hear the diesel rumble of a large truck approaching. Leopold hears it too. His head snaps toward the window. The tow truck pulls into the driveway, a massive flatbed with Portland Auto Recovery emblazoned on the side. The driver climbs out, clipboard in hand, and approaches the front door. I excuse myself and open it before he can ring the bell. Curtis Griffin, the driver asks. That's me. We're here for the 2024 Cadillac Escalade. Repossession order from Cascade Credit Union. You called this morning to remove yourself as co-signer. That's correct. I say loud enough for the room to hear. The vehicle belongs to Leopold Ashford. He's right here. Leopold pushes past several guests and reaches the doorway. What the hell is this? A repossession, sir. The driver says, unimpressed. Your loan is 43 days past due. Your co-signer removed his guarantee this morning, which triggered our acceleration clause. The full balance is due immediately. Since you haven't paid, we're recovering the vehicle. You can't just take it, Leopold says, his voice rising. I have a court order, the driver says, showing the clipboard. Keys, please, or I can hook it up either way. Leopold spins to face me. You did this. You called them. You set this up to humiliate me. I called them Tuesday, I say calmly. After I discovered you'd forged my wife's signature to steal $89,000. After I found out you convinced me to co-sign for a vehicle you couldn't afford. After I learned your company has been losing money for 8 months straight, while you've been lying to my daughter about being profitable. 40 guests, Leopold hisses. You're doing this in front of 40 people. You demanded Edith cook 33 dishes in front of these same 40 people, I say. 2 weeks after radiation therapy, while she could barely stand. So yes, Leopold, I think this audience is exactly right. The driver clears his throat. Sir, I need the keys, or I'm hooking up the vehicle. You're blocking my schedule. Leopold's hands shake as he pulls keys from his pocket and throws them at the driver's feet. I feel a hand on my shoulder. Vincent Barton, his expression grim. Mr. Ashford. Vincent says, his voice carrying across the room. Given what I've witnessed here today, the financial deception, the manipulation of an elderly woman recovering from cancer, the bribery attempt on a healthcare professional, and the fraudulent representation of your company's performance, I need to inform you of a decision. Vincent's hand moves from my shoulder to Leopold's. The investment deal is over. Vincent's words hang in the air for 3 seconds before the first guest moves. Then they all move at once. 40 people reach for coats without making eye contact. No one says goodbye. No one offers condolences or congratulations or even polite exit pleasantries. Parents herd children toward the door with urgent whispers. A woman I recognize from Leopold's office grabs her husband's arm and pulls him past the catering table without pausing. I watch them file out through the entry hall like mourners leaving a funeral where the deceased's crimes were read aloud instead of eulogies. Helena Barton pauses at the threshold. She turns back toward the living room where Astrid stands frozen near the fireplace, face pale, hands trembling. For a moment, I think Helena might speak, might offer some maternal comfort despite everything. Instead, she turns and walks out. Vincent lingers after his wife disappears down the front steps. He approaches me, ignoring Leopold slumped against the far wall. "I need to apologize for my daughter," Vincent says quietly. I consider my response. Astrid tried to bribe a nurse. She manipulated an elderly woman recovering from cancer. She knew about Leopold's lies and participated in them. But I also remember being young and stupid and convinced that love could justify anything. "Now she's young," I say. "She can still learn." Vincent nods, the kind of nod that passes between two men who've both made mistakes and lived long enough to regret them. He glances at Leopold, then back at me. "Good luck, Curtis," he says. Then he's gone. The last guest pulls the door closed with a soft click. The house feels enormous in the silence. Just me, Edith, still seated in her chair by the window, Leopold against the wall, and Astrid near the fireplace. 4 people in a room designed for gatherings, surrounded by abandoned plates and half-empty wine glasses, and the printed menu still lying on Vincent's vacated chair. Leopold straightens slowly. His eyes are bloodshot. His tie loosened his expression, hovering somewhere between rage and despair. "Anything else you want to strip from me?" he asks. I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out a small manila envelope. Every detail documented: the forged signature, the dates, the dollar amounts, the banking records. It's missing only my signature at the bottom. "Francis holds the digital master," I say, keeping my voice level. "Forging signatures on commercial contracts qualifies for FBI investigation, especially when submitted by a 20-year SEC veteran with documented evidence." Leopold stares at the form like it's a live grenade. "Are you filing?" he whispers. I look at my son, 34 years old, still asking if consequences are real. "Not yet," I say. His shoulders sag with relief, but I'm not finished. "I won't file if you repay the $89,000 over 2 years. Monthly payments, fully documented, processed through Francis. If you miss a payment, if you vanish, if you try to dispute the debt, Francis files this complaint within 24 hours. Leopold processes this. Trapped but not destroyed. Prison if he runs. Freedom if he complies. I've built him a cage with an open door, but only discipline will keep him from locking himself inside." "Took 2 years," Leopold says. "Roughly $3,700 per month," I reply. "Manageable if you take real employment instead of chasing investment deals you can't execute." I see his life in snapshots, then superimposed over his adult face the 6-year-old who fell off his bike and needed Band-Aids and reassurance, the 17-year-old who got arrested for drunk driving and needed bail and a lawyer, the 24-year-old who declared bankruptcy and needed money, the money Edith got by selling her mother's diamond bracelet without telling me until months later. Always needing, never becoming. Maybe this is the last thing I can give him, a boundary he can't charm his way across. Leopold doesn't respond. He just stares at the envelope in my hand. I tuck it back into my pocket. "Edith and I are leaving now," I say. I walk to the bedroom and roll 2 suitcases into the hallway. Edith rises from her chair, smoothing her pale blue dress. She adjusts the cream scarf around her neck, the one that hides the radiation marks she doesn't like guests to see. When we reach the front entry, Leopold blocks the doorway. "You can't just abandon me," he says. I stop, look at him. "At 34, I'm not abandoning you," I say. "I'm just stepping out from between you and your consequences. Stepping out from between, like removing training wheels from a bike. Like pulling your hand away from a drowning man who refuses to swim like love, that finally learns to say no because yes has never taught anything worth knowing." Francis is waiting outside. I continue. He'll contact you Monday with the repayment schedule. You can rebuild from here, Leopold, but you have to build it yourself this time. Leopold's jaw works, but no words come out. I take Edith's hand and guide her past our son out the front door into the cool June evening. Francis Ward stands beside a black sedan at the curb. He opens the rear door without speaking. I glance back at the house. Leopold stands on the threshold framed by the entry hall light. Behind him, the living room stretches empty, abandoned plates, silent rooms, vacant spaces where 40 witnesses stood. The driveway is bare where the Escalade sat this morning. Astrid's car is already gone. I didn't hear her leave during the confrontation, but she's not there now. Airport, Francis asks as I settle into the seat. Yes, I say. We have time. The car pulls away from the curb. I watch Leopold in the rearview mirror shrinking, diminishing, becoming small against the large, empty house. Edith rests her head on my shoulder. Her hands lie folded in her lap, steady for the first time in weeks. It's done, she whispers. And I realize she didn't find peace by protecting Leopold from consequences. She found it by finally demanding he face them. 3 days in Hawaii, and Edith's eyes have changed. She sits on the balcony of our Maui resort, overlooking the Pacific, coffee steaming in her hands, watching the sunrise paint the water gold and orange. No scanning for exits. No bracing for impact. Just coffee and ocean and the first morning in months where her shoulders don't carry invisible weight. I sit beside her reading a novel I've restarted twice because I keep losing the plot. Between us on the small table, my phone lies face down. Leopold has called 19 times in 3 days. I've ignored all of them. Edith glances at the phone, then at me. Answer it, she says. I set down my book. You sure? I need to hear his voice, she says quietly, to know if I'm sad or relieved. I pick up the phone and tap the callback number. Put it on speaker. Leopold answers on the first ring. Dad. His voice sounds raspy, exhausted. Thank God. Where are you? I ask. At the house, he says, then corrects himself. Your house. Sorry. At your house. Silence stretches between us, filled only by the distant sound of waves against the Maui shore. The Astrid left. Leopold continues the words, tumbling out like he's been rehearsing them for days. Took everything. Her clothes, her car, the furniture she bought. Vincent canceled the investment deal permanently, his lawyer sent a letter. The company can't meet Friday's payroll. Creditors are calling every day. Collections agencies. He stops. Breathes. I wait. Edith's face remains neutral, but I see her processing, weighing 34 years of motherhood against 3 months of manipulation. I'm not asking for help, Leopold says finally. I know you won't. I just needed to tell someone. Okay, I say. That's it, Leopold's voice cracks. Just okay. What do you want me to say? I don't know, he admits. Something. I look at Edith. She nods, slightly permission to continue. You won't be at the house much longer anyway, I say. Francis sent you a 30-day notice last week. Silence on the line. Then what? Eviction notice. Legal and valid under Oregon law. Francis filed it the day before we left for Hawaii. You're kicking me out, Leopold's voice rises. No, I say calmly. I'm reclaiming my home. Another silence. I can almost hear him processing the timeline, realizing I planned this before the engagement party, before the public confrontation, before everything unraveled. The eviction wasn't reactive anger. It was strategic boundary. Where am I supposed to go? He asks. That's your decision to make, I say. You're 34. You'll figure it out. Edith reaches across the table and takes my free hand. Her palm is warm from the coffee cup. Are you apologizing because you hurt your mother? I ask Leopold. Or because everyone caught you? The question hangs in the salt air between Maui and Portland. I wait. Give him space to choose truth over convenience. What is forgiveness without accountability, permission to wound again? What is justice without mercy, revenge dressed as principle? I don't know the perfect answer. I only know that reconciliation without repentance is just resuming the cycle with different scenery. Leopold offers no answer. That is the answer. The day you understand the difference, I say, call back. I end the call. Edith squeezes my hand, once then releases it and returns to her coffee. We sit in silence watching the Pacific swallow the sunrise. 6 months later, I stand in our kitchen in Cannon Beach holding Edith's latest medical report. The coastal home is small, 2 bedrooms, functional kitchen living room with wide windows overlooking the Oregon coast. We sold the Portland house in August after Leopold moved out. Downsized deliberately. Bought something we could manage without strain. Edith looks healthier than she has in years. Her hair has grown back short and soft, silver white like winter grass. Color has returned to her face. She moves through the house without hesitation, without the careful rationing of energy that marked her radiation recovery. I read the doctor's chart note aloud. Patient's recovery significantly aided by absence of physical and psychological stressors. Edith reads over my shoulder. Absence of stressors. That's diplomatic. Doctors choose their words carefully, I say. So do SEC investigators, she replies, smiling. Her body tells the story, her words won't, shoulders no longer hunched against invisible blows, hands no longer checking for tremors, breath no longer held waiting for the next demand. She cooks when she wants to, not when commanded. She rests when tired. She says no without justification. She's learning to be a person instead of a resource. My phone chimes an email from Francis. I open it while Edith starts preparing dinner. The update is brief. Leopold lost the company in October. Filed bankruptcy again. He's working now at a logistics firm, entry-level position, steady paycheck, nothing glamorous. Renting a studio apartment in Beaverton. Astrid finalized their divorce in September. Vincent Barton severed all connections and instructed his attorney to reject any future contact from Leopold or Astrid. Leopold's surviving, I tell Edith, summarizing the email. She nods. Good. Surviving is a start. Another email arrives, this one from Alaric Upshaw. The subject line reads, Gratitude. I open it. Hi, Mr. Griffin. It begins. I just signed the largest client in our firm's history. The presentation was flawless because the numbers were honest. Turns out you were right. True numbers need no defense. Thank you for teaching me that integrity isn't optional, it's foundational, Alaric. I smile. Something survived the wreckage after all. What is it? Edith asks, seeing my expression. Alaric, I say, reading the relevant line aloud. True numbers need no defense. You taught him well, she says. He was willing to learn, I reply. That's the difference. Later that afternoon, I walk down the gravel path to check the mailbox at the road. The December wind carries the smell of salt and pine. Gray clouds gather over the ocean, promising rain by evening. I pull out the mail utility bills, a furniture catalog, a credit card offer, and a handwritten envelope. No return address. Postmark Portland, Oregon. I turn it over in my hands. The handwriting looks vaguely familiar, but I can't place it. Not Leopold's angular scrawl. Not Francis's precise script. Edith appears beside me, drawn by my stillness. What is it? She asks. Don't know, I say. Handwritten, Portland postmark. I hold the envelope up to the fading afternoon light, as though I could divine its contents through the paper. Open it, Edith says, but I hesitate. 6 months of peace. 6 months of recovery. 6 months of learning to live without crisis. And now this. Edith takes the envelope from my hand and slides her finger under the seal before I can hesitate again. A single page unfolds. I lean over her shoulder as she smooths it flat. The handwriting is rough but deliberate, written carefully, as though the writer fought against lifelong habits of carelessness. "It's Leopold," Edith says quietly. "I study the script." She's right. That's why I didn't recognize it. He wrote more carefully than usual, each letter formed with concentration instead of his typical rushed scrawl. "Mom," Edith reads aloud. Her voice is steady but soft. "I don't know if you'll read this. Dad probably told you to throw it away. I wouldn't blame you if you did. I've been working at Morrison Logistics for 3 months. Loading docks, inventory management, nothing glamorous. 12-hour shifts. My supervisor is 23 and calls me old man when he thinks I can't hear. I'm learning things I should have learned at 20. Mom, I turned your love into obligation. I assumed because you always forgave me I had the right to do anything. I took your yes for granted and never listened when you tried to say no. I was wrong. I don't expect immediate forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve eventual forgiveness. I just want you to know that for the first time in my life, I'm learning to take responsibility. Not because someone's forcing me, because I finally understand what I did to you. I love you. I'm sorry. Leopold." Edith's voice cracks on the word learning. She stops reading and stares at the page. I stand silently beside her, letting the words settle. "Keep reading," I say quietly, though I can see the letter has ended. Edith turns the page over, nothing on the back. Then she tilts the envelope and a small rectangle falls into her palm. A check for $2,000. The memo line reads, "January 2025 payment." Edith holds it up to the window light. $2,000. Is that the right amount? Close enough for month 1, I say. He's trying. The check isn't just paper and ink. It's proof. Not of completion of effort. Not of redemption of movement in the right direction. Edith studies Leopold's signature on the check, the same careful script as the letter. "Do you think he means it?" she asks. I consider the question carefully. 34 years of watching Leopold promise and fail, reform and relapse, apologize and repeat. 34 years of hoping this time would be different. But something about this letter feels different. Not the words are cheap. The check. The careful handwriting. The admission that a 23-year-old supervisor calls him old man. Humility costs more than apologies. For now, I don't know, I say honestly. But it's a first step in the right direction. Edith folds the letter and slides the check back inside the envelope. "Should I reply?" she asks. I take her hand. "Reply when you're ready, not when he needs it." That distinction settles between us like morning light through coastal fog. Readiness versus need, self-care versus codependence, love that finally learned to say wait. Edith nods slowly. She sets the envelope on the kitchen counter and doesn't look at it again for the rest of the evening. 1 week later, I find her sitting at the small dining table by the window overlooking the ocean. She's writing on a card, simple white stock, no decoration. I watch from the doorway as she pauses, rereads what she's written, then signs her name. 2 lines, that's all. She slides the card into an envelope, addresses it to Leopold's apartment in Beaverton, affixes a stamp. As she walks past me toward the front door to place it in the mailbox, I catch a glimpse of what she wrote. I still love you. But this time you have to cook your own meal." I let out a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from surprise and recognition and perfect clarity. "You cook your own meal," I say. "He'll understand," Edith replies, smiling. "Perfect," I say. She laughs too. Not the polite sound she used to make when Leopold told jokes that weren't funny, but real relief, real lightness. Then she walks to the kitchen and opens the bottom drawer beside the stove. I stand in the doorway watching. She pulls out a small tin box, the kind that once held Christmas cookies, now scuffed and dented from decades of storage. Her grandmother's box. The one she brought from her childhood home in Eugene. The one that held her most precious things. She lifts the lid carefully. Inside, old letters, tied with ribbon, yellowed photographs of family long gone, a pressed flower from our wedding bouquet. And a silver bracelet. Edith goes completely still. The bracelet, she whispers. How did you? Bought it back 2 years ago, I say. Waited for the right moment. She sold that bracelet when Leopold declared bankruptcy at 24. Her grandmother had given it to her on her 16th birthday. Solid silver, delicate filigree, irreplaceable. Edith never told me she was selling it. I found out months later when I noticed it missing from her jewelry box. By then, it was gone sold to a private collector through an estate dealer. It took me 18 months to track it down. Another 6 months to negotiate the purchase. I've been carrying this secret for 2 years, waiting for the day when returning, it would mean restoration instead of just replacement. You've been carrying this secret, Edith asks, holding the bracelet up to the light. Some things are worth waiting for, I say. The bracelet fits like day one. 40 years, vanished in an instant. 40 years of loss and recovery compressed into a silver circle around her wrist, proof that what's truly yours can find its way home. Edith doesn't cry. She just stands there turning her wrist, slowly watching the bracelet catch the afternoon light. Then she reaches back into the tin box and pulls out a yellowed recipe card. Her grandmother's apple pie. She sets the oven to preheat and begins pulling ingredients from the cupboard: flour, sugar, butter, cinnamon. Her movements are practiced, precise, unhurried. I watch from the doorway as she measures and mixes, rolls out dough, peels apples with steady hands. The bracelet gleams on her wrist. No one demanded this pie. No one threatened consequences if it wasn't perfect. No one created a 33-dish menu and expected her to perform while recovering from radiation. She's baking because she wants to. That's the difference. The kitchen fills with the smell of cinnamon and baking apples and butter turning golden in the heat. Edith stands at the counter, recipe card propped against the mixing bowl, hands steady, whole again. Not despite everything that happened, because of how we chose to respond. The kitchen is quiet in a way it hasn't been for years. No hurry, no dread. Just pale winter light through the window and the soft sound of Edith humming as she rolls dough across the counter. I stand in the doorway of our Cannon Beach home watching. Edith's back is straight. Her hands move with confidence, measuring, mixing, rolling, no tremor, no hesitation. She wears the grandmother's bracelet on her left wrist, silver, catching the morning light each time she reaches for flour. She's making apple pie, the same recipe she baked under duress 6 months ago. But this time, nobody demanded it. Nobody created a 33-dish menu. Nobody threatened consequences if the crust wasn't perfect. She's baking because she wants to. That simple reversal, coercion to choice, transforms everything. The trauma food becomes freedom food. The weapon becomes gift. The performance becomes pleasure. Smells like your grandmother's kitchen, I say, stepping into the room. Edith glances up, smiling. It does, doesn't it? Her hair has grown back soft and silver gray, cut short in a style that frames her face. Color has returned to her cheeks, not the flush of exertion or stress, but the natural warmth of someone sleeping well and eating regularly and living without constant cortisol flooding her system. She's gained back the weight she lost during radiation. Her body no longer looks braced against invisible blows. You look happy, I say. I am, she replies simply. No qualification, no but or except or despite. Just happiness, stated as fact. I move to the small dining table. She's already set 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cups of tea steaming gently. A simple glass jar holds wildflowers, nothing elaborate, nothing arranged for aesthetic impact, just stems. She gathered yesterday from the field behind our house. 2 plates. Perfect number, I say. Always was, Edith replies, sliding the pie into the oven. Strange how we forgot that, I say. She wipes her hands on a dish towel and joins me at the table. We sit across from each other, sipping tea, waiting for the timer. No 40 guests evaluating presentation. No Vincent Barton analyzing investment potential. No Leopold calculating what he can extract. No Astrid manipulating behind polite smiles. Just two people in a small kitchen overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Simplicity. As luxury, 2 plates worth more than 40, silence richer than applause. Invisibility to strangers more valuable than visibility to exploiters. Strange to bake without anyone demanding it, Edith says after a while. Strange to sit without calculating exit routes, I reply. She laughs, a real laugh, light and unguarded. Is this what normal people feel like? I don't know, and I admit, but I like it. The oven timer chimes 30 minutes later. Edith pulls the pie out, golden crust, bubbling filling, cinnamon and apple and butter mingling in the air. She sets it on a cooling rack and turns to look at me. I stand and pull out the chair by the window, the one facing the open Pacific, where morning light streams in and the view stretches uninterrupted to the horizon. The best seat in the house. For years, Edith sat in kitchens with doors closed, hidden in back bedrooms while guests filled the living room, tucked into corners out of sight, erased from view. Not anymore. Your seat, I say. Edith hesitates. The best one. Always should have been, I say. She sits slowly as though testing whether the offer is real. The winter sun catches her face, illuminating the silver in her hair, the clarity in her eyes. I watch my wife sit in sunlight and realize this quiet morning, this simple pie, this woman who survived, this is what winning looks like. Not revenge, not public humiliation, not even justice in the legal sense. Just one woman reclaiming her space, her time, her right to sit in the best seat and eat food she baked because she wanted to. I sit across from her in the other chair. Edith cuts 2 slices of pie and serves them on plain white plates. No garnish, no presentation, no performance. The first bite is perfect. Warm and cinnamon-sweet apples, tender crust, flaky. Exactly like I remember from her grandmother's kitchen 40 years ago when Edith first made this for me during our engagement. Perfect, I say. It is, Edith agrees. We eat slowly. No conversation needed. Ocean waves drift through the cracked window, rhythmic, eternal, indifferent to human drama. Edith's bracelet catches the pale winter sun as she lifts her fork. Light scatters across the table between us, fractured into tiny rainbows by the filigree silver. I think about the journey of that bracelet given in love, sold in desperation, recovered in patience, returned in restoration. A circle that came home. Maybe that's the story of everything. Leopold took. We established boundaries. He's learning slowly, incompletely, but learning to give back. Not because we forced him, but because consequences finally caught up with choices. Edith gave until she had nothing left. Now she's learning carefully, tentatively, but learning to receive, to sit in the best seat, to say no without justification, to bake when she wants and rest when she's tired. And me, I'm learning that protection isn't the same as enabling, that love can say no, that justice and mercy aren't opposites, they're partners in the same dance. The pie disappears slowly. Steam rises into morning light. Edith's hands rest on the table, steady and sure. No tremor, no fear, no performance. Just a woman who survived sitting in sunlight, wearing her grandmother's bracelet, eating pie she baked by choice. Outside, winter waves crash against the Oregon coast, relentless, cleansing, eternal. Inside, silence finally means peace instead of dread. Edith looks at me across the table. The fractured light from her bracelet dances between us. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. Everything that matters has already been said. Not with words, but with boundaries, held consequences, enforced love, redefined space, reclaimed. This is the ending. Not reconciliation, restoration. The bracelet catches another beam of pale winter sun, sending light across the table, across our empty plates, across the space between us that used to hold fear and now holds only mourning. I step onto the small balcony, coffee in hand, gazing at the Pacific stretching infinite and gray. How many frauds did I dismantle in 20 years at the SEC And how did I miss the one happening in my own home? The question settles over me like the morning mist. 20 years investigating financial fraud, congressional testimony, federal courtrooms, billion-dollar cases that made headlines and destroyed careers. I watched men in tailored suits collapse when the numbers exposed their lies. Ponzi schemes, insider trading securities, manipulation, accounting fraud. I knew every variation, every tell, every red flag, and somehow I lived with Leopold's fraud for months before I let myself name it. The coffee steams in the cold air. Waves crash against the rocks below, rhythmic and indifferent. I think about the ultimate lesson those 20 years taught me: fraud has no fixed address. It doesn't live exclusively in Wall Street boardrooms or offshore accounts or shell corporations registered in the Caymans. It resides anywhere people choose to turn a blind eye, usually out of love, sometimes out of fear, always out of the desperate hope that ignoring it will make it disappear. I'd been investigating Leopold's scheme for months, without admitting that's what I was doing. Because calling it fraud meant calling my son a criminal. Calling it forgery meant acknowledging he'd weaponized my wife's signature. Calling it elder abuse meant facing the fact that we'd raised someone capable of exploiting his own mother during cancer recovery. So instead, I called it a misunderstanding, a mistake, a temporary lapse in judgment. Anything but what it was. The SEC investigator in me knew better. But the father couldn't afford to know. That's how fraud survives in families, not through sophisticated schemes, but through the simple, corrosive power of denial dressed as loyalty. I take another sip of coffee. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division complaint sits in Francis Ward's desk drawer. Unfiled. Every month, Leopold's check arrives. $2,000, sometimes $2,200, whatever he can manage from his logistics job. Francis sends me a brief note each time: on time this month, or 3 days late but cleared, or full amount plus 20 for interest. 11 months so far, 13 to go. That envelope may never be filed, or it may be filed tomorrow if Leopold stops paying stops. Trying stops, choosing accountability over avoidance. The system demands I make that choice: now file, or don't file, prosecute, or forgive, justice or mercy, as though they're binary options. But life doesn't work in binary. Which truth weighs more, the system's demand for consequences, or love's demand for something the system can't calculate? Redemption measured in monthly checks instead of courtroom verdicts, transformation tracked through entry-level paychecks instead of sentencing guidelines. I spent 20 years believing numbers don't lie. That's still true. But I've learned numbers don't love either. They can't forgive. They can't hope. They can't look at a 34-year-old man working 12-hour shifts on loading docks and see the ghost of a 6-year-old who needed Band-Aids, or wonder if this time, finally, improbably, he might actually learn. Numbers are perfect. People aren't. The system is designed for the former. Family operates in the territory of the latter. My job was to enforce the system. My calling is to protect my wife. Sometimes those align, sometimes they don't. The ocean waves crash below eternal accountants, tallying nothing, demanding nothing, simply existing. The only numbers that don't lie because they never promised to care. I turn to look back through the window into our small kitchen. Edith stands at the sink washing the breakfast plates. That's when I understand. Sometimes the truest justice isn't found in courtrooms or federal complaints or congressional testimony. It's found in the sound of ocean waves on a quiet morning. In a woman you promised to protect finally safe in her own space. In a son learning responsibility through payment plans instead of prison cells. In hands that don't tremble anymore. Justice isn't always measured in conviction rates or sentencing outcomes or cases successfully prosecuted. Sometimes it's measured in whether the person who was hurt gets to heal. Whether the vulnerable one gets to be safe. Whether restoration happens even when reconciliation hasn't. I spent 2 decades believing justice meant holding people accountable through the system. I still believe that. But I also believe now, after everything, that justice can look like an unfiled envelope in a lawyer's desk drawer, leverage held, but not deployed, mercy offered with teeth sharp enough to bite if necessary. Accountability doesn't require incarceration. It requires consequence. Leopold faces consequences every day: lost business, lost fiancé, lost status, lost comfort. He works for a 23-year-old supervisor who calls him old man. He sends checks he can barely afford. He lives with the knowledge that 40 people witnessed his exposure. That's not nothing. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe in 2 years he'll vanish, and Francis will file the complaint, and federal marshals will arrest him, and the system will exact its price. Or maybe, just maybe, he'll make all 24 payments and learn something that prison never could have taught him. I don't know which future we're living toward, but I know this Edith is safe. Her hands are steady. She sits in the best seat. She bakes when she wants to. She says no without fear. That's what I promised to protect. Not Leopold's potential, not family unity, not the illusion of peace purchased through Edith's silence. Her, and she's finally genuinely safe. I finish my coffee and step back inside. Edith stands at the kitchen sink, hands moving through soapy water washing the plates we used for breakfast. The grandmother's bracelet catches the winter light streaming through the window, scattering small rainbows across the counter. She's not performing. There's no audience to impress, no meal to justify, no demand to meet. She's just washing dishes because they need washing, and she feels like doing it now. Her back is straight. Her movements are unhurried. She hums softly a melody I don't recognize, but that sounds like contentment. This is her kitchen, her choice, her pace, her home. I watch from the doorway, coffee cup empty in my hand, and understand what the 20 years at the SEC never taught me. Sometimes justice looks like revenge. Sometimes it looks like punishment. And sometimes, maybe the best times, it looks like a woman standing tall in winter morning light, washing dishes in her own kitchen, wearing her grandmother's bracelet, finally free. Not because someone went to prison, because someone finally came home. And to you listening to my story, remember this: protecting the people you love sometimes means protecting them from family. I spent 34 years enabling my son because I confused love with unconditional rescue. Don't make my mistake. I should have drawn boundaries years ago, the first time he asked Edith to sacrifice herself for his comfort, the first time he chose manipulation over honesty. Every time I looked away, I taught him that consequences were optional. I wasn't helping him. I was slowly killing my wife. Real family justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about standing up when someone vulnerable needs protecting, even if the threat comes from your own blood. These dad's revenge stories you hear on channels like Wise Revenge aren't just about getting even. They're about fathers finally choosing their wives, their daughters, their responsibilities over their guilt. I believe God put me through this to teach me that mercy without accountability isn't mercy at all. It's permission. Family justice means loving someone enough to let them face their consequences. That's the hardest love there is. If my story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose family justice over family peace? Share this with someone who needs to hear that boundaries aren't betrayal. And if you want more dad's revenge stories like this one, subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means everything to me. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story were fictionalized to protect privacy and strengthen the lesson. What matters is the truth at its core. Love without boundaries destroys what it tries to save.